Winter had arrived, and everyone was enjoying and relaxing on the streets. A happy family could be seen passing by, but suddenly their path was blocked by a big guy. They moved aside without hesitation. This was our protagonist, Juan, who wondered why he always had to shrink and make way for others. But somewhere deep down he knew the reason. Out of all the people on the street, he was the only one who was alone. He continued down the street, and then noticed someone. It was a man dressed as Santa Claus, who also seemed to be alone. The old man had placed a cardboard sign in front of him, inviting people to share their wishes. Juan sat down, pulled some money from his pocket, and gave the old man a piece of cake as well. The Santa immediately grabbed his hand, stating that he wanted to repay him. Juan did not understand and began to panic. The man continued, stating that he had come to grant a wish to a kind person. Juan was shocked by his grip. The Santa continued, stating that he could not return to his Santa village unless Juan told him his wish. He began to beg. Juan asked if the man would let him go after he told him his wish. The Santa agreed. Juan told him a wish, but the Santa sensed it was not his true wish and asked for his real one. Juan's expression changed because somehow he knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted to escape the loneliness. He stated that he wanted a wife as sweet as a bunny and a daughter as cute as a mongoose. The old man remarked that this was the scent of honest desire and that he could clearly see the loneliness within the boy. He said that he was lucky to have met someone as kind as Juan. The Santa's expression then immediately changed. He stated that he would arrange for a wife and a beautiful daughter who would respect him. Juan immediately panicked, dismissed the man as a lunatic, and started running. The Santa yelled from behind that all the Santas in the Santa village were cheering for him. Later, Juan was seen sitting in a train. On his wrist, the mark left by the Santa's grip had appeared. He told himself that no matter how he looked at it, it had just been the ramblings of a strange old man. But he knew why he had told him his wish anyway. Somewhere deep inside, he wanted a happy family just like everyone else. He closed his eyes and felt darkness close in around him. Then suddenly his eyes opened, and he realized he was inside a moving prison carriage. He had no idea where he was. He glanced around at the others, and realized the carriage was filled with slaves. He could hear soldiers talking outside, speaking in a strange language he could not understand. Everything around him looked like a medieval movie set. The language was one he had never heard before, and not a single Asian person was in the prison carriage. Juan slowly came to realize that he had fallen into another world. Then he noticed a man who appeared to be dead. He quietly removed the man's clothes, apologizing to him, then put them on himself and lay down on the ground, thinking about the Santa's promise. He wondered if this was all happening because of the old man, or if it was simply a dream he needed to wake up from. But days and nights passed inside that carriage, and he could not even keep count. The carriage never stopped moving, and he was completely drained. He came to understand that everyone around him was a slave, and that the soldiers were transporting them to be sold. Whenever the soldiers lined the slaves up, someone who appeared to be a village chief would come and select whichever ones were in good condition. Juan had to accept that he too was a slave. It was a quiet blow to his pride, but in another sense it gave him a flicker of anticipation, because being selected was the only chance he had to escape this hellish carriage. His physical condition had not been bad at first, so he had hoped to be sold quickly. But after passing through several more villages without being chosen, he sank into despair and exhaustion. He slammed his fist on the ground, thinking of his late mother, who had always told him that no matter what happened, he should work hard. He thought of his father and mother, wondering if he could endure this situation, wondering about the Santa's promise. Then he reached out and grabbed a fork lying beside him. He was done with this world and his old one both, because dying felt like the only way out. But deep down he knew that was not what he truly wanted. He wanted a happy family. Then suddenly, light poured in from outside. A woman with a bright smile was looking at him, holding out a piece of bread. Seeing her, it was as though he had seen an angel. Beside her stood a little girl, small and adorable. Juan immediately dropped the fork. Everything had changed in an instant. The scene changed to a modest wooden house. Inside, the same woman sat together with the little girl as they shared a simple meal. The blonde child drank soup directly from her bowl, while the woman pushed her own portion toward her and encouraged her to eat more. The little girl looked between the two bowls for several seconds before shaking her head. Lizzie claimed she was already full and wanted the child to have the rest, but the little one acted like an adult and refused. The girl replied that if she was hungry, then Lizzie must be hungry as well. After saying that, she pushed the food back toward the woman. Lizzie smiled softly and agreed to continue eating together. Their peaceful moment suddenly shattered when loud knocking echoed through the house. Lizzie immediately picked up the girl and held her tightly while warning her not to open the door. Outside stood the village chief. He announced that the village had chosen one of the prisoners to become her husband and ordered her to prepare to return to the mountain with him. The news struck Lizzie like lightning. Fear spread across her face because she did not want to relive whatever nightmare waited in that place again. Even though escape seemed impossible, she wrapped both arms around the little girl and refused to let go. She had not known the child for very long, yet the thought of leaving her alone was unbearable. Tears gathered in Lizzie's eyes while despair consumed her heart. Sensing that fear, the little girl also began crying. Her sobs quickly turned loud and desperate, filling the dark house with sorrow as the heavy atmosphere swallowed everything around them. Later that night, Lizzie sat alone inside the dark cabin, while the little girl slept nearby. The thought of returning to that nightmare made her body tremble. She had already gone through it once, and the idea of facing the same suffering again felt unbearable. Her eyes slowly drifted toward the sleeping child. The little girl's situation strangely reminded Lizzie of her own past. The child had once been nothing more than the daughter of a dead man, and had not even been given a proper name. Seeing her always brought back memories Lizzie wanted to forget. Long ago, her own father had traded her away for a single rabbit pelt as if her life meant nothing. The day she arrived at her new home became the beginning of her misery. She had not even finished settling her belongings when the man called her husband already began treating her cruelly. That was the moment Lizzie realized her new life would not be salvation but another prison. Later, while she lay helpless on the floor after one of those terrible moments, a tiny figure slowly walked toward her. The little girl crouched beside her and gently touched her, as if trying to ease the pain. In that endless nightmare, the child became the only warmth Lizzie had. Not long afterward, the hunter left for the mountains as usual and never returned again. Villagers claimed wolves had taken him somewhere in the hunting grounds. His disappearance brought relief, but that relief was quickly replaced by fear. Lizzie knew exactly what an unprotected widow meant in a place like this. A woman without a husband was like prey standing outside the fence. Anyone could target her whenever they wished. Earlier that day, Lizzie and the little girl left the cabin together and walked toward the village while holding hands. Suddenly the child stopped moving and pointed excitedly into the distance. Her eyes sparkled after spotting a prisoner wagon arriving from afar. Lizzie looked over and saw the wooden cage moving slowly along the road. Seeing what he's going to do, she immediately got panicked. She remembered shielding the little girl from her former husband's anger, and wondered if history was preparing to repeat itself again. The sight frightened her, yet she could not walk away. That was why she quietly offered him bread through the bars. Their silence ended when the village chief arrived and asked why she was still there. He warned her that the soldiers were coming, and told her to head back. Lizzie, with a light smile, gently led the child away, but the little girl kept glancing toward the cage with concern. Meanwhile, Jawan stared blankly at the bread. The guards opened the cage and shouted for him to come out. Without any kindness, they dragged him forward and threw him straight onto the dirt. The piece of bread rolled away after the impact while Juhan struggled to understand what was happening. Soon 3 prisoners were forced to kneel before everyone. The village chief gave an order, and without warning the guards brought down the other 2 men using sharp tools. Afterward, one of them calmly cleaned the stained blade using a strange glowing scroll. Juhan stared in disbelief and wondered what kind of magic existed in this world. One of the soldiers suddenly approached the village chief and quietly reported something. The man claimed he sensed mana. The chief immediately turned toward Johan. Confused and unable to understand a single word, the young man only lifted his head with a lost expression. The scene later returned to Lizzie's cabin, where an older village woman had come to visit. She brought supplies and told Lizzie to keep them for later use. The older woman explained that the new man did not understand their language and reminded her that someday she would have to repay the village's help. She admitted that nobody had liked Lizzie's late husband, and that the villagers tolerated him only because he hunted well. However, she believed this new man was different. The soldiers had said he was merely a commoner, yet his hands and feet looked softer than many nobles. The older woman smiled and said that if he could hunt properly, they might finally live comfortably. Lizzie immediately shook her head. Comfort was not what she wanted anymore. Holding the older woman's hands with tears in her eyes, she quietly wished for only one thing. She hoped this husband would not hurt anyone. She only wanted peace for herself and the little girl. Their conversation ended when loud knocks struck the door. Lizzie instantly pulled the sleeping child into her arms and looked outside through a gap in the wall. Her body stiffened after seeing Juhan standing there beside the village chief. The chief entered first and announced that he had brought her new husband. Lizzie could barely process those words. Meanwhile, Juhan stepped inside while asking where they were taking him. Since she understood nothing he said, she became even more frightened and wondered why such a sick-looking man had been brought to her house. Then she noticed something else. He was unbelievably tall. Lizzie had never seen anyone so large before. On the other side, Juwan stared at her in confusion after recognizing her as the woman who had given him bread. Seeing her trembling like a frightened rabbit only left him more puzzled. The village chief suddenly grabbed him and pulled him closer. Standing between them, he introduced Juwan as Lizzie's new husband. Then he joined their hands together and cheerfully told them not to be nervous, since they would soon become family. Juwan's mind finally started connecting everything. Santa Claus had promised him a pure wife and an adorable daughter. Now a terrified woman stood in front of him, while a tiny child hid behind her like a frightened hamster. For a moment he completely forgot where he was. Then one thought exploded inside his head. What if Santa Claus had actually been real? Even if the wish came true, Jihuan still could not understand why he had been thrown into another world and forced through so much suffering first. Anger immediately rose inside him. In his imagination, he became a furious bear preparing revenge while Lizzie and the little girl looked like small animals trying not to get eaten. Outside the cabin, Jihuan stood together with the villagers while trying his best to understand what they were saying. The village chief and two other men continued discussing something, while occasionally glancing in his direction as if deciding his future. One of the villagers eventually stepped forward and offered his hand. Jihuan assumed it was some kind of greeting and accepted it without hesitation. The problem came when he returned the handshake normally. The other man immediately twisted his face in pain while Jihuan stared in confusion. For a second he even wondered if crushing someone's hand was the local custom. When he finally let go, the villager stumbled backward while complaining loudly, causing the village chief to burst into laughter. The chief handed Jihuan a bow and arrows. Holding the weapon left him completely speechless. He could not understand why they had suddenly armed him, but it clearly was not for combat. The chief then started making exaggerated gestures, placing fingers above his head like rabbit ears, and pointing toward the forest. Only then did Jihuan finally understand. They wanted him to hunt. The village chief looked pleased after realizing the newcomer understood his terrible acting. He smiled proudly and pointed deeper into the forest. A white rabbit appeared nearby while calmly nibbling leaves from the grass. The chief excitedly pointed toward it and urged him to shoot. Jihuan had never used a bow in his life. He remembered seeing Olympic archery, and knew hitting anything was difficult even for trained people. Even so, he pulled the string back with all his strength and focused. The rabbit dropped instantly. He honestly had no idea how he landed such a perfect shot. While trying to process what had happened, he noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. Lizzie had returned. Beside her walked the little girl. The moment Jihuan saw them approaching together, sweat quietly formed on his forehead. Reality finally hit him. That beautiful woman was truly his wife now. A strange warmth rose inside him while his face slowly heated up. The villagers watched his reaction without understanding why the giant newcomer suddenly looked so awkward. Not long afterward, the three of them sat together for their first meal as a family. Lizzie quietly served stew into bowls for Jihuan and the little girl. It was a simple dish, yet the smell alone felt warm and comforting. Both of them watched him carefully as he lifted the spoon and tasted it. Jihuan said nothing. He simply continued eating. Then a small smile appeared. Family had always been a distant dream for him. From his teenage years into adulthood, he had lived alone without anyone waiting for him at home. Yet now, somehow, he had been given people to protect. Maybe things had not happened naturally, but that no longer mattered. Looking toward the sky, Jihuan silently declared that he still wanted revenge on Santa Claus. At the same time, however, he sincerely thanked him. The following morning, everything moved quickly. They packed their things and began traveling toward their new home. Jihuan carried a heavy sack while walking ahead, but after turning around he noticed Lizzie and the child struggling to keep pace. Their steps had grown slower and exhaustion clearly covered their faces. The sight frustrated him because he could not even ask whether they were all right. At that moment he remembered his mother's advice. She always said that whenever he felt the urge to protect someone, hesitation should never exist. That memory strengthened his resolve. Suddenly the little girl stopped walking altogether. Small hands grabbed Lizzie's skirt while tears gathered in her eyes. Jihuan immediately crouched down and tried to reassure her. Unfortunately, his sudden movement only frightened both of them. Lizzie panicked and quickly spoke in her own language while the child cried even harder. He blinked. Apparently his serious expression had made everything worse. Without saying another word, Jihuan simply moved forward and lifted both of them at once. Both stared at him in complete shock as he effortlessly carried them together and continued walking. Their bodies instinctively clung to him while Lizzie struggled to understand what was happening. Jihuan adjusted them carefully to make them more comfortable during the trip. Carrying the luggage together with both of them somehow did not feel heavy at all. During that journey, Jihuan made a decision. He would learn their language. He would become a hunter. He would support this family properly. Tears quietly gathered in Lizzie's eyes as she watched him. None of it matched the image she had feared. Eventually they reached a small cabin hidden deep within the forest. The village chief said his farewell and left, leaving only the new family behind. Jihuan studied the house in front of him. Cold air slipped through the walls and immediately made him shiver. He had always hated winter and cold weather. Still, he approached the door and slowly opened it. Inside, Lizzie stood waiting. Her eyes were wet, confused. Jihuan asked why she was crying, but she gave no answer. Instead, Lizzie suddenly ran deeper into the house. Jihuan looked around and finally understood. The shelves were empty. The room had been turned upside down. Everything had been taken. Outside, Lizzie explained through gestures that while she was away in the village, someone had stolen everything they owned. Winter was approaching, yet they had nothing left. Later he found her sitting alone on the grass. Jihuan quietly sat beside her. For several moments neither moved. Then he gently placed his hand on her head. Lizzie looked up in surprise. His touch was careful and warm, carrying none of the fear she expected. Jawan tried to reassure her even though they could not understand each other. Lizzie watched him while worrying about their future. They could barely communicate. He knew almost nothing about hunting. Surviving here would not be easy. Then Jawan smiled. With complete confidence, he promised that he would protect her. The words never reached her ears properly, yet somehow their meaning still did. Her heart felt lighter. Since losing his parents, he had survived everything alone. If he could endure that much by himself, then there was no reason he could not endure even more now. This time he had a family. He would find a way, no matter what happened. Unable to stop herself, Lizzie quietly began crying. Juhwan pulled her into a gentle embrace to comfort her. At that moment the little girl rushed toward them while shouting something in panic. She wrapped her arms around Lizzie and begged the man not to hurt Rai. A crying woman rested in Juhwan's arms while a small girl clung tightly beside them. Countless questions filled his head, yet none had answers. Even so, he made another promise. He would become a good husband. He would become a good father. And one day neither of them would regret choosing him. Time passed, and the cabin slowly changed. The damaged house had been repaired. Sitting on the floor, Juhwan quietly thought about his relationship with Lizzie and Dorothy. In a way, it felt like they had returned to the beginning again. The closeness from earlier seemed distant now, almost as if he had become a stranger once more. Oddly enough, part of him felt relieved because it gave them a chance to start properly. An idea suddenly came to him. If they were going to live together, then they should at least know each other's names. Jushan caught their attention and pointed at himself before clearly saying his own name. Lizzie and Dorothy watched him curiously while trying to understand. Then he extended a hand toward the woman and gently asked for her name. Lizzie hesitated. For a moment she simply stared. Then she quietly answered. The pronunciation sounded strange to him at first, but after she repeated it again, Jawan finally understood. A smile appeared on his face as he praised her beautiful name. After that he turned toward the little girl. The atmosphere instantly changed. Dorothy looked at Lizzie. Lizzie lowered her eyes. Only then did Juhan realize the truth. The child still had no name. Silence filled the room while he searched for something to say. Eventually he remembered a story from his old world. With a warm expression, he decided that he would give her one. He called her Dorothy. Juhan explained through gestures and simple words that it belonged to a girl who traveled through adventures, met precious companions, and eventually reached happiness. He wanted the little one before him to become that kind of child too. Dorothy repeated the name softly. Then again. A bright smile slowly spread across her face. Outside, Juhan returned to chopping wood while Lizzie secretly watched from a distance. In her eyes he remained an incredibly strange man. He was taller and stronger than the one who came before, yet everything else was different. He treated her gently. He never raised his hand. He never shouted. The more she observed him, the less he seemed like someone from that place, quietly whispering his name in her mind. Lizzie remembered every painful day she had endured. No one had ever shown her this much kindness before. She could not understand why he was so good to her. Suddenly Juwan noticed her. He smiled, then waved while calling her over. Lizzie froze. His black hair and dark eyes caught her attention again. Old rumors returned to her memory. There were stories about a kingdom fighting a war that had supposedly summoned a hero. That legendary figure was said to possess black eyes and black hair exactly like his. Juwan slowly approached with curiosity while Lizzie immediately dismissed the idea. A hero would never appear in a tiny village like this. It had to be nothing more than gossip. The two stopped face to face. Silence. Lizzie became nervous as her heartbeat quickened. Looking at him closely only confirmed it further. The black eyes, the dark hair. Yet instead of fear, relief filled her chest. She did not understand why she felt so comfortable around someone she barely knew. Juwan also looked confused. Then he gently placed a hand on her head. Lizzie's body stiffened. The only memories she had of men touching her head were cruel ones. Yet this felt different. Warm, careful, soft. For the first time she wished the gesture would continue. Juwan noticed her reaction and blushed slightly. Then he acted on impulse. He leaned forward and softly kissed her forehead. Lizzie completely froze. Juwan froze too. The next second embarrassment exploded across his face. Unable to handle the situation, he grabbed a nearby bucket and desperately searched for an excuse to escape. Lizzie remained standing there with a burning face while her heart refused to calm down. Meanwhile, Juhan mentally screamed at himself. They had only just met. They could not communicate. They barely understood each other. So why had he done that? Trying to calm down, he wandered farther than expected while planning to fetch water before returning. Then his steps stopped. Something was there. From the shadows emerged a giant wolf with glowing red eyes. Cold sweat ran down Juhan's back, but fear never reached his face. This was not a story anymore. This was a real wolf. Without hesitation, he crouched and grabbed a piece of wood lying nearby. The beast attacked first. Its jaws shattered the improvised weapon instantly. Juwan answered with a punch. The blow landed directly on the wolf's head. The creature bit his arm in return and pain shot through him. yet he refused to fall. Another punch followed. The impact sent the beast howling, then flames burst from Jawan's body. His eyes widened. He had no idea what was happening. Shock turned into instinct as Jawan climbed onto the creature and rained down flaming punches one after another. The wolf finally collapsed. Silence returned. Juan lay on the grass while trying to understand what had just happened. Earlier his arm had been covered in flames, yet now there were no burns. He reached one conclusion. He had used magic. The memory of the glowing scrolls carried by the guards immediately returned. Perhaps coming to this world had given him powers after all. Juan raised his hand dramatically. He shouted for a fireball. Nothing happened. He tried firestorm. Still nothing. Firewall. No result. One spell after another failed until he finally stood there looking completely defeated. Even so, he knew one thing. It had not been an illusion. His wounds had slightly healed. If he truly possessed magic, maybe he could one day use it to provide delicious food, protect his family, or even heal people in a village with no doctors. The thought brought back another memory. After losing his parents, his grandfather had been the last pillar supporting him. Yet even that person disappeared in an accident. His uncle blamed him for everything afterward. Juhan remembered lying helpless on the floor while relatives shouted at him. They called him misfortune. Back in the present, Juhan pushed those painful memories aside and focused on the giant wolf lying before him. He knew leaving it there would attract more beasts, and the blood still needed to be drained. Not wanting to waste time, he threw the enormous body over his shoulders and started walking home beneath the moonlight. As he moved through the forest, memories of his grandfather returned. The old man had often butchered animals while teaching him small things without realizing how useful those lessons would become someday. Carrying the wolf across his back, Juhan smiled faintly and thought his grandfather would probably be proud if he saw him now. At the same time, he wondered how he was supposed to train this strange new magic while hauling monsters around. Meanwhile, life continued peacefully at the cabin. Lizzie and Dorothy worked together inside while handling simple chores. Dorothy excitedly ran over with a bowl and handed it to her mother. Lizzie thanked her with a smile and gently patted her head, causing the little girl to beam with happiness. Dorothy happily ran around the house. Then she stopped. Her eyes widened. A giant wolf head appeared outside the entrance. The little girl screamed. Hearing that cry, Lizzie rushed over immediately. Without hesitation, she grabbed a knife from the table and ran toward the door. Her first instinct was not fear for herself. It was protecting Dorothy. Only then did she notice Juwan standing there with the dead beast on his shoulder. Her face instantly changed. Calling his name, she rushed forward. Juwan, exhausted from carrying the wolf, dropped the carcass onto the ground. Lizzie stopped, knife still in hand, completely frozen. Without thinking, she stepped forward and hugged him. Juwan blinked. Dorothy immediately joined too, wrapping both arms around his leg while crying from fear and relief. Smiling awkwardly, he explained through gestures that only his arm had been bitten, and everything was all right now. The three sat together beneath the moonlight beside the wolf. Lizzie spoke softly in her language, and Juwan, despite understanding nothing, somehow felt she was thanking him. Dorothy also said something while looking worried, making him realize she had probably been frightened too. A small guilt settled inside him. He had promised never to make them cry again, and yet he had already failed. A crow landed on the cabin roof while Juwan began working on the wolf inside. Using a sharp knife, he carefully separated fur from flesh. The work proved much harder than it looked when his grandfather used to do it. Sweat covered his face as he silently admitted defeat and promised himself to find an easier method next time. While finishing the work, he suddenly heard his name. Turning around, he found Lizzie standing at the doorway with a bucket. She approached slowly and used gestures to show that he should place the meat inside. Juwan finally understood. She wanted to help. Trying hard to remember the word, he carefully spoke his version of thank you in their language. Lizzie looked surprised. Then she smiled. Apparently he had said it correctly. The atmosphere turned awkward as they stood facing one another. After a moment, Lizzie quietly attempted the same thing in his language. She repeated his words with uncertainty while asking through her expression if she had done well. Juwan smiled sincerely. He thanked her for trying. Lizzie immediately became embarrassed. As they carried the bucket together, her thoughts wandered again. No one had ever thanked her simply for bringing water. No one had treated ordinary actions as something precious. The memory of earlier returned. His hand on her head, the kiss on her forehead. Her face turned bright red. Even now her heart still refused to calm down. She wondered if he had ever done such things with other women. The thought strangely hurt her chest, making emotions she could not understand rise inside. Back in the cabin, Juwan placed the meat on the table and nearly jumped when Lizzie suddenly appeared beside him. She moved closer to help, though in her mind, this should have been her duty. Instead, Juwan acted as if it belonged to him. Their hands ended up touching the same piece of meat. Silence. Lizzie grew nervous. Juwan leaned closer. Her heart nearly stopped. But instead of anything bold, He simply placed another soft kiss on her forehead. Lizzie froze again. This time she stepped back immediately with a burning face while internally panicking. In pure embarrassment she even grabbed her own hair, convinced he had misunderstood her earlier reaction. Determined not to repeat that mistake, she promised herself to keep her eyes open next time. Meanwhile, Johan simply carried the bucket away without understanding why she looked ready to explode. Dorothy was secretly watching everything. The little girl had seen the entire scene. Lizzie entered complete despair. Unable to survive the embarrassment, she fled like a storm, and left Johan standing there in total confusion. The next day the family walked together through the sunny forest. After a while he noticed tiny hands repeatedly reaching toward the bucket. At first he did not understand, then realization hit him. Dorothy wanted to help. A gentle smile appeared on his face. Lowering the bucket, he thanked her for helping carry something important for the family. Dorothy's eyes sparkled. She grabbed the edge proudly. For perhaps the first time in her life, she felt useful. The scene shifted back inside the cabin, where Lizzie carefully touched the giant wolf pelt spread across the wooden floor. Johan sat behind her while quietly watching, wondering why she was drying it inside the house. A moment later, realization finally struck him. This was not simply fur. The thick pelt was valuable, warm, and probably an important treasure for surviving winter. Dorothy soon joined them and crouched beside her mother. Curiosity sparkled in her eyes as she reached out and touched the dark fur. The softness immediately amazed her. Seeing mother and daughter smiling together warmed Juhanin's heart. For the first time in a long while, he looked at them and felt that his family was safe. Later, the small cabin hidden among the mountains grew busy again. Lizzie carefully rubbed salt into pieces of meat while preserving them for later use. Johan watched every step closely, because he wanted to learn how food was stored in this world. She looked genuinely happy after saving the fat and useful parts from the hunt, while he silently admitted there was still so much he needed to understand. After resting long enough, Johan finally stood up. The sudden movement startled Lizzie. She quickly waved her hands and tried to tell him to sit back down and recover more. Johan only smiled and gestured that he felt fine now. Gently touching her shoulder, he promised he would not push himself too hard. Lizzie stood speechless after he left. Outside, Juhan found a large tree and decided to practice swinging the axe. Looking at his reflection in the blade, he trusted his strength despite lacking experience. He raised it high and brought it down with all his power. The result shocked him. By the time he returned, he carried enough chopped wood to fill a huge basket. Lizzie and Dorothy were completely stunned by both the speed and amount. Entering the house, Juhan finally sat down from exhaustion while Lizzie hurried over with concern. Dorothy suddenly appeared holding a cloth. Then she ran off again with endless energy. A moment later she returned with wet little hands after playing with the water bucket and jumped straight against his chest, leaving tiny handprints on his clothes. Juhan looked surprised at first, then laughed. Lizzie also laughed. The room became lighter. Dorothy stared up at him with bright eyes while waiting for his response. Juhan gently patted her head and thanked her for helping take care of him. The little girl immediately became even more excited and started running through the room again, while both adults watched with helpless smiles. For Juhan, the moment felt unreal. Like a dream. He quietly promised himself that he would protect those smiles no matter what. Night eventually arrived. Smoke rose from the chimney while dinner filled the cabin with warmth. The adults sat together eating while Dorothy had quietly fallen asleep nearby. Then they heard a tiny sound. Looking down, they discovered Dorothy sleeping while still hugging her spoon. Both burst into laughter. Carefully, Juhan lifted the sleeping girl into his arms and carried her toward the bed. Lizzie watched the scene silently while warmth filled her chest. He tucked Dorothy in gently before returning to the kitchen. Later, Lizzie prepared hot water and cleaned household items. She did not notice Juhan approaching until he lightly stopped her hand. Startled, she turned toward him. The room had grown quiet. Only dim light remained. Juhan looked embarrassed while Lizzie avoided his eyes. Gathering courage, she used the clean cloth to wipe the sweat from his neck and hands. Her movements were careful and gentle. In her heart, she told herself this was simply what a good partner should do. Juhan quietly accepted her care. A soft smile appeared on his face. Only then did Lizzie realize how close they had become. Embarrassment instantly returned. Seeing her panic, Juhan lightly held her hands to calm her. Their eyes met for a brief moment before he softly suggested that they should rest. Soon the two entered the small sleeping room. Dorothy rested peacefully nearby while the lamp cast a warm glow between them. They lay facing one another in silence. Juhan looked toward the sleeping child. In his heart, he wished for only one thing. He wanted these two people to stay beside him for a very long time. Closing his eyes, he silently asked Santa Claus to protect their happiness until his final day. Old memories slowly returned to Lizzie. She remembered how nobles lived inside massive estates filled with countless rooms, while common families like theirs slept together in one small space. Because of that, children often learned far too early how married couples spent their nights. The thought pulled her into the past. She remembered hiding beneath blankets as a child while listening to her mother's crying continue until morning. Her father's voice had always carried fear. Back then she had lived in constant terror, believing that one day the same future would become hers. Morning warmth pulled her back. The soft crackling from the fireplace echoed through the room as Lizzie slowly opened her eyes. Confusion appeared immediately. She clearly remembered falling asleep on the cold floor. Then she realized the truth. Jawan's arm had become her pillow. Her expression softened. The fear she once held toward married life quietly faded away. Resting against his broad chest, she thought about how much her world had changed since meeting him. A gentle smile appeared as she moved slightly closer to that comforting warmth. Not long after, Jawan woke up as well. He looked down. Both Lizzie and Dorothy had claimed his arms. Dorothy slept peacefully while Lizzie remained frozen after realizing how close they were. Her heartbeat became so loud she thought he might hear it. Jawan only smiled. The morning felt peaceful. Carefully, he sat up and covered Dorothy with a warm blanket. Then he gently brushed the blonde girl's hair, causing her to mumble something in her sleep. Later, Lizzie approached the fireplace to take the metal bucket, but before she reached it, a huge hand grabbed the handle first. She stepped back. Jawan smiled. The hunter carried the bucket outside, filled it with fresh water, then returned while saying several words in their language. Lizzie blinked in confusion, trying to understand. Her face suddenly turned red. Jawan tilted his head. Apparently, the affectionate way he addressed her had embarrassed her. After thinking for a moment, he decided a nickname might be better. Lizzie became even redder, turning away immediately. She tried hiding her face while her ears betrayed her completely. Jawan almost laughed. Her reactions were becoming dangerously adorable. He lightly touched her back and tried getting her attention again. At that exact moment, Dorothy woke up, then instantly started imagining food. A giant piece of meat practically floated through her imagination, while her stomach loudly protested. Without warning, she dropped onto the floor. The child launched herself at them while happily calling out for her family. Both adults looked startled before smiling. Unfortunately, Dorothy had no interest in romance. Her target was meat. The moment she saw the food, her eyes sparkled like treasure had appeared. She climbed toward the wooden bucket with determination while Jawan laughed loudly at the sight. Dorothy practically shouted for breakfast with all the strength in her tiny body. Watching her struggle made him decide something. He would hunt harder. This house would never go hungry. Soon afterward, Jawan entered the forest, carrying his axe. Unlike before, he now possessed a proper weapon and the determination to support his family. Then the atmosphere changed. His steps stopped. Something felt wrong. The air itself had become heavy. Jawan slowly looked around the dark trees while wondering what kind of monster would appear this time. A figure finally emerged from the shadows. An old man. His face remained hidden beneath a hood, while Jawan tightened his grip around the axe. The stranger quietly observed him. The scene shifted briefly into the past. The old man stood there studying enormous tracks left behind by a giant beast. For days he had watched the cabin and already reached one conclusion. The new resident had no idea how to properly hold a weapon. That was why it felt absurd. An amateur should never have defeated such a monster. Even experienced hunters would hesitate. Something about this situation was wrong. Curiosity pushed him forward. And now he stood before the answer. The stranger's eyes suddenly fell upon his arm. Specifically, the bite marks. His expression changed. The wound had nearly healed. A normal person would already be bedridden or dead from infection. Yet this giant man stood perfectly fine. Only one explanation remained. Magic. The old man remembered how rare mages were in this world. People with such abilities almost never appeared in places like this. Meanwhile, Jawan stood there sweating internally while wondering what kind of suspicious old man had appeared. The stranger's eyes suddenly glowed purple. Inside his mind, only one thought remained. After waiting all this time, his chance for revenge had finally arrived. And Jawan, who understood absolutely nothing, quietly stared back while trying to decide whether this old man was dangerous. The old man's eyes slowly drifted into the past. Long before becoming the stubborn hunter standing in front of Jawan, he had once been a young warrior filled with ambition. Back then, village guards fought in wars hoping to earn merit and one day become retainers under nobles. Wanting independence instead of inheriting his father's path, he left home and wandered across villages while dreaming of becoming a famous hunter. Eventually, he settled in a mountain village rich with resources and accepted the role of guardian. The land looked peaceful, but one strange detail always remained. Firewood near the village was scarce, even though commoners could freely enter the Lord's forest. Because of that, people gathered wood only from the shallow edges while avoiding the deeper woods entirely. The young guard never questioned it. That mistake nearly destroyed his life. One day he pushed farther into the forest while mapping the land. He still remembered the terror that followed. Wounded and lying helpless on the ground, he realized too late that he had walked into a nightmare hidden within the mountains. A massive green creature stood before him. The truth was cruel. Those monsters ruled the upper slopes, and worse still, they kidnapped women to continue their bloodline. Trembling with fear, the young guard finally understood why girls kept disappearing from nearby settlements. The peaceful mountain village had always hidden a dark name. It was the village of monsters. He survived, barely. But survival only left scars. For years he lived alongside the same villagers he secretly resented. Hatred became obsession, and obsession became purpose. One night, holding a burning torch beneath the dark sky, he swore he would one day erase every nest of those creatures from the mountains. The memory faded. Back in the present, the old hunter looked at Juan with hope shining inside tired eyes. The giant newcomer possessed absurd strength, incredible size, and healing abilities no normal person should have. In the old man's mind, everything pointed toward one conclusion. This outsider could become the greatest monster hunter the mountains had ever seen. He also knew time was running out. The creatures would return eventually. Once they ran out of women to take, the village itself would become prey. Before that happened, he decided he would shape Juswan into a weapon strong enough to end them. With a sly smile hidden beneath the hood, the veteran believed an agreement would stop the rookie from escaping halfway through training. The old man finally spoke. Juan understood nothing. Even so, he respectfully bowed while keeping his balance and maintaining distance. The old hunter noticed immediately. Despite his confusion, the young man had not lowered his guard. That alone made him grin. From that moment onward, he decided this giant fool would become his apprentice. The next morning arrived quickly. Juan stretched his body and felt like he had barely slept before sunlight flooded the cabin. Outside, the old hunter patiently waited near the yard. He deliberately avoided entering because he did not want strangers getting used to stepping into the home where Lizzie and Dorothy stayed alone. Peeking through the wooden door, Juan spotted him immediately. Then he saw the smile. It was suspicious. Very suspicious. For a brief second he was reminded of terrifying meetings back on Earth and managers preparing bad news. Without wasting time, Juan quietly grabbed his backpack and tried pretending he had not noticed the old man at all. Right then, Lizzie called him. He turned. Her face was red. In her hands rested food she had prepared for him. She nervously packed everything together while avoiding eye contact. Watching her like that immediately made Juan blush too. Meanwhile, Dorothy silently observed the scene with sparkling eyes. Then the little girl suddenly ran. Her tiny feet crossed the wooden floor as fast as possible until she stopped directly in front of him, arms open. Juan froze. Behind her, Lizzie stood looking equally nervous. A moment later, she helped adjust his bag and gently urged him to eat well during the trip. Juan smiled without realizing it. Having people worry about him like this still felt unreal. Before leaving, he spoke softly. He could not understand every word, but somehow he knew. She wanted him to return safely. Wanting to learn, Juan pointed toward Lizzie and repeated the phrase the best he could. Both mother and daughter looked surprised. Lizzie soon smiled and nodded after hearing his pronunciation. Dorothy quickly joined in. She repeated the same words again. Return safely. Juan's heart nearly surrendered on the spot. He waved back with a smile and promised he would return home. Mother and daughter continued waving from the doorway while seeing off the protector of their little family. Then Juan turned. His expression instantly changed. Deep inside, he absolutely did not want to leave home. Unfortunately, survival came first. Juan and the old hunter continued moving deeper into the mountains while thick trees surrounded them from every direction. Time slowly lost meaning during the journey, and the young man eventually started wondering how many hours had already passed. His legs felt heavy while the endless hike drained his energy, making him question what exactly the old man wanted to show so badly. Without warning, the veteran stopped. Juan almost walked into him. The old hunter tapped his foot against the dirt below. Confused, Juan lowered his gaze and immediately noticed something strange. The footprints left behind were not ordinary at all. Every step had an odd angle and spacing, as if the man was intentionally placing them that way. A dangerous idea appeared in Juan's head. Naturally, he copied it. The giant rookie straightened his back and began imitating every step the old hunter made. The veteran looked back, noticed the imitation, and quietly smirked without saying anything. The journey continued. As they moved farther into the forest, the old hunter started teaching through actions instead of words. He touched trees while explaining that every mountain carried different animals and resources. Sometimes he drew rough maps directly onto the dirt and pointed toward hills, rivers, and hunting paths. Juan listened seriously. Even without understanding everything, he memorized every movement. Far away in the mountains, Juan sat on a large rock while resting. The old hunter calmly observed him before reaching into his leather bag. Curious, Juan leaned forward, wondering what lesson would come next. The old man pulled out a small wooden item. Then he finally signaled for lunch. Juan immediately brightened. Opening the lunchbox, he remembered Dorothy's excitement and Lizzie's careful preparation. The sight alone made him smile. For a brief moment he felt like the happiest man alive. Then the old hunter suddenly raised his hand. Juan froze. The veteran urgently gestured for him to close the box. Confused, the young man wondered what mistake he had made this time. Through signs and simple words, the old hunter explained that cooked food released scents strong enough to attract dangerous beasts from far away. Juwan instantly lost energy. His treasured meal had become monster bait. Soon afterward, they arrived before another cabin hidden inside the forest. The old hunter pointed toward it and proudly declared it would become Juwan's training place. The bow looked strange, straight, unfamiliar, nothing like the curved designs Juwan knew. The veteran ignored his confusion and raised the bow. Slowly he pulled the string while aiming upward. Then the arrow flew. It tore through the air and buried itself deep inside a distant tree. Juwan stared. Now he understood. He copied the stance and prepared his own shot. The old hunter stepped closer to adjust his arms, but the moment he felt the tension held by Juwan, his expression changed. The giant did not shake. Jahawan ignored everything around him and focused only on the target ahead. Every movement became practice. Every word became a lesson. Inside his heart, one promise slowly formed. He wanted strength. Strength to solve problems alone. Strength to protect Lizzie. Strength to protect Dorothy. Far away at the cabin, peace still remained for a little while. Dorothy lay on the bed while humming a cheerful song about the blue sky, Lizzie's pretty hair, Jawan's dark hair, and the delicious meat he had brought home. The little girl was so satisfied that she honestly believed the meat was still sitting inside her tiny stomach, waiting for another meal. Looking toward the corner of the room, she noticed Lizzie smiling again, and quietly realized something important. Ever since Jawan arrived, her mother laughed more often, and no longer looked lonely all the time. Every time she heard the great hunter laugh, a warm feeling quietly bloomed inside her chest. But happiness soon brought fear. Dorothy knew neither Juwan nor Lizzie were her real parents, and that thought slowly darkened her expression. She stared at the stars outside and wondered whether one day Juwan would only take Lizzie away while leaving a useless child behind. Tears gathered in her golden eyes as old wounds returned. Before those thoughts could swallow her completely, a strange light outside caught her attention. The little girl suddenly realized she was alone in bed, and immediately wondered where Lizzie had gone in the middle of the night. The cruel voice of her former father echoed through her mind again. He used to call her worthless for not being born a boy and constantly complained that she only wasted food. Shaking from those memories, Dorothy rushed toward the meat bucket first because protecting the food somehow felt important. Relief filled her face after seeing everything still there, but she continued searching for her family. Then a loud voice exploded outside, freezing her in place. Hiding behind the wall, she carefully peeked through a crack and immediately recognized the men standing in the yard. Meanwhile outside, 3 debt collectors had already surrounded Lizzie. They accused her of stealing the meat, even though she desperately explained that Jawan hunted it himself. The blonde leader only laughed while another man claimed her husband was already dead and called her an ungrateful thief. When Lizzie continued denying them, the men shoved her aside and forced their way into the house. The moment they stepped inside, everything changed. Their eyes landed on the giant wolf pelt displayed in the room, and greed instantly appeared on their faces. The leader slowly touched the fur while realizing its value, and the others immediately began searching every corner of the cabin. Hidden beneath furniture, Dorothy listened to their footsteps moving closer and finally understood what they really wanted. They were not here for food. They wanted everything. Lizzie rushed inside and threw herself in front of the wolf pelt before anyone could take it. Tears filled her eyes as she declared that the item belonged to their family. Before she could react, the blonde one suddenly struck her across the face. The impact threw her onto the wooden floor while pain spread through her body. She immediately turned. Dorothy stood hidden nearby. The little girl looked terrified. Fear replaced pain at once. Even while trembling, Lizzie tried moving toward her daughter. Dorothy could only watch in shock while tears slowly filled her eyes. The child blamed herself, believing something she did caused all of this. The men laughed. One of them warned that getting caught would become troublesome because experienced hunters were rare in the village. The blonde leader ignored him and grabbed Lizzie by the arm. He suggested dragging her deeper into the forest where nobody would hear anything. Before leaving, the leader threatened her. If she told Jawan anything after he returned, the cabin would burn. Then they left. Dorothy remained behind. Hidden inside the dark room, the little girl shook with fear. The person she loved most had been taken away. Crying desperately, she ran outside and shouted Juhan's name again and again while begging him to return quickly. Far away in the forest, Juhan still walked beside the old hunter while listening to another lesson. The veteran suddenly pointed backward, as if trying to show something, but Juhan only bowed politely and thanked him for the training. Then he heard it. Dorothy's voice cut through the forest like a knife. The young man instantly stopped because that was not ordinary crying. Fear spread across his face as he realized Dorothy would never cry like that without reason. He ran. Every horrible possibility rushed through his mind during the sprint back home. The scene before him made his blood boil. 3 men stood there. Lizzie was restrained. Something inside him broke. One of the invaders turned after hearing the heavy footsteps approaching from behind. Before he could react, Jahuan's fist slammed directly into his face and threw him across the ground. The young man immediately stepped between Lizzie and the criminals while she stared at him with tearful relief. But Jahuan never looked back. He walked straight toward the remaining men with fury written across his face. The second thug started sweating the moment Jahuan moved. A brutal knee struck his stomach and dropped him instantly. The last blonde man tried throwing a desperate punch, but Jahuan dodged and grabbed him without effort. The man was lifted into the air and smashed against the dirt. Jahuan pinned him down while anger continued rising inside him. Anyone who touched his family deserved punishment. Blue energy slowly gathered around his fist. Lizzie froze. The blonde criminal trembled while Jahuan grabbed his collar. Right then Lizzie shouted his name. Jahuan hesitated for only a second. Another thug attacked from behind with a sharp weapon. Jahuan caught the arm effortlessly and squeezed. Fear spread across the man's face. The strength holding him felt monstrous. Lizzie begged him to stop, and at that moment the old hunter finally arrived. He grabbed Jahuan's arm and pointed toward the cabin window. Dorothy was there. She was crying. The moment Yuan saw her tears, all the murderous anger disappeared. Jahuan had always been gentle and warm, yet today she discovered another side of him. He could become terrifying when protecting people he loved. For a brief moment she remembered her former husband, and feared history repeating itself, but that fear disappeared the instant she looked into Jahuan's eyes. There was no cruelty there, only desperation, only the wish to protect. Meanwhile, Jahuan misunderstood everything. Seeing her expression made him think she was afraid of him now. The sadness on his face hurt Lizzie more than the fight itself. Language stood between them again, preventing her from saying what she truly felt, so she acted instead. Calling his name with all her strength, Lizzie grabbed his hands firmly. Warm calluses touched her palms while certainty filled her heart. This man was not someone to fear. He was her shelter. Pressing his hands against her face, Lizzie silently thanked the man who had finally come into their lives. Jahuan immediately embraced her, thinking about why she was so grateful. If anyone should be thankful, it was him. Then suddenly Lizzie noticed little Dorothy crying inside the house. She looked toward the window, pointed, and immediately started running toward home. Inside she asked if Dorothy was okay. Little Dorothy was still trembling and crying, even though she had been the one who had asked Jahuan for help and called for him. Seeing Jahuan's massive fist swinging in person had been terrifying. The swollen faces of her stepmother and Lizzie kept flashing through her memory, and the thought that one day her own face might look like that frightened her deeply. She wanted to apologize to Lizzie and tell her that she had been wrong, before Lizzie started treating her like a ghost the way her stepfather once had. Little Dorothy immediately apologized for hiding under the bed instead of helping. Through her tears she stated that everything had been her fault. Lizzie immediately embraced her, asking what she was saying. She explained that when their eyes had met earlier, she had only pretended not to see her because she was afraid those men would find her. She continued, telling Dorothy that she had nothing to feel guilty about. She then told her that because of her papa, everything was fine now. Dorothy asked who Papa was, because her father was already dead. With a bright smile, Lizzie asked if she did not know about Jahuan. Little Dorothy stated that Jahuan was just Jahuan, and asked if he was her husband. With a smile, Lizzie confirmed that he was right. Jahuan was her husband, which made him Dorothy's papa too. Little Dorothy seemed unable to process it, so Lizzie explained further. Since she was Dorothy's stepmother and Dorothy was her daughter, Jahuan became her papa as well. Dorothy could not believe she had not realized this before. She looked at Jahuan through the window and asked Lizzie again if he was really her papa. Lizzie calmly confirmed it. She told Dorothy that Jahuan was nothing like her old father. He was not someone who beat them, he was someone who protected them. That was the reason Jahuan had beaten those scary men so brutally. Listening to these words, Dorothy immediately looked outside through the window and called out to Jahuan, yelling Papa. She thought to herself that someone with such a huge face, huge body, huge hands and huge feet was her papa. She ran outside thinking that she had a super strong and amazing papa who protected both her and Lizzie. She remembered that he had never once hit her. He held her tight at night when they slept. He even smiled at her. He gave her meat, and he had even given her a name with a bright expression on his face. She could not believe that the person who had given her her name was her papa. It was wonderful. Jahuan immediately turned around and, seeing her, embraced her with a smile. He thought that Dorothy kept shouting strange words, but somehow he understood what she was trying to say. He stood up while holding little Dorothy in his arms, and then he suddenly caught a smell and realized that Dorothy had wet herself. She looked so innocent that Jahuan almost felt bad for noticing. Then Lizzie came out from inside, and the three of them shared a warm embrace as a happy family. Dorothy suddenly remembered something and, pulling herself free from Jahuan's arms, ran toward the fallen men and began searching for something. She spotted the basket of meat and tried to lift it, but her tiny body simply was not strong enough. She strained with full force, her face turning red. Lizzie and Jahuan came over to help. Dorothy still struggled, and Jahuan thought it was incredible. Both he and Lizzie agreed inwardly that her obsession with meat was truly something else. Jahuan stepped in and lifted the basket for her. Looking at little Dorothy's cute and adorable face, he thought to himself that becoming a hero in the eyes of a child over a single basket of meat was remarkably easy. Lizzie stepped in, and using a hand gesture signaled Jawan to head inside. They all went in together after everything was settled. Jawan then walked over to the fallen men, and his expression immediately turned dark. He was ready to finish them, but the old man stopped him and began calming his anger through gestures. Somehow Jawan understood. It would be a problem if he were arrested for killing these men, especially now because he was no longer alone. He had a family. He told himself that he had memorized their faces perfectly, and that if their paths ever crossed again, their fate would be far worse than death. The old man then pointed to the items left behind, and indicated that they would be very useful in the mountains. Jawan glanced toward his home, and saw Lizzie playing with little Dorothy. He went inside, picking up the items and the wolfskin, and placing them away. He thought to himself that losing a family once was more than enough. With a quiet smile, he thought that no matter what happened, he would protect these two until the very end. He waved at Dorothy and Lizzie with a bright face as they waved back.